Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jean McCormick, and I have the privilege of being the president of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, and the joy of welcoming you here this afternoon for our Getting to the Point series. It is so exciting to be part of the Institute. We were just telling the Senator about what happens here every day in this chamber. People just like yourselves come in and they become senators for a day, and they take up the issues, the very issues that are in front of the Senate, and their voice is heard. Whether you're 8 years old or 88 years old, you get to weigh in on what you think the critical issue of the day. This room is the heart of the Institute. It is what Senator Kennedy hoped it would be. A place, he said, that changes people, not on the first day that they become a senator, but over time. The majesty of the place and the purpose of the place really makes a difference. And in fact, we see it here every day. So we're very happy to have you here. In the past 11 months, we've hosted over 10,000 students alone, and many other visitors, almost 50,000 visitors coming to try their hand on making government work in the way that we all hope it will work. We do have an outstanding series of public programs. This is one of them, and another series called Across the Aisle, where we highlight senators who are working on an issue together. And in fact, Senator Booker was in our program in Washington on criminal justice reform. And that we do to celebrate the style of our own good Senator Kennedy, who was always trying to find common ground. We are delighted to have all of you here, and a special welcome to the 1787 members. We have a growing number of people who want to be down on the chamber for these events, and so they've joined the 1787 Society, so we'd welcome you if you'd like to do that. We're happy to provide these programs free, but tonight I think we even have people who are in the studios where this is being streamed out. Senator Booker, you have brought us our largest crowd since we started doing these programs. So I encourage you to return if you haven't come to actually see the museum and to actually participate in a program yourself here in the chamber. We would love to have you. It's my great pleasure when I say this is the heart of the Senate, then we have somebody who brings us vibrant life and energy and inspiration every day to do what we do, Mrs. Victoria Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jean, for your friendship and for your leadership of this magnificent place. And welcome to all of you to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. Look at this crowd. Your numbers bear witness to the fact that this is truly an extraordinary evening and that we have a very special program with a very special guest. On this day before Leap Day, I am honored to welcome this remarkable man to the Kennedy Institute as our featured speaker for our Getting to the Point series. Getting to the Point refers to our location, Senator, which is Columbia Point. It has nothing to do with filibustering. As Jean mentioned, our special guest is no stranger to the Kennedy Institute because down in Washington, he was part of a panel in our very first program in our Across the Aisle series, where he participated alongside Senators John Cornyn, Republican of Texas, Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, and Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island, to discuss criminal justice reform and the need to reduce and end the mass incarceration of nonviolent criminals. Yes, conservative Republicans and progressive Democrats working together on criminal justice reform. The program was held, quite appropriately, I think, in the Kennedy Caucus Room, in the Russell Senate Office Building. And the room was filled with men and women eager to hear our speaker and the other senators address that pressing issue. There were representatives from the Justice Department and the White House in the audience, law professors, defense attorneys, and everyday people who cared about making our system of justice better and fairer. And there were people who were there just to see that, yes, indeed, Republicans and Democrats in Washington can still work together on issues of consequence. At the end of that powerful program, as the senators were being called to the floor of the Senate and literally being pulled away by their staffs to vote, our speaker insisted on staying behind to make one of the most powerful speeches on racial justice and equality that I've ever heard. You could have heard a pin drop as he spoke, and when he finished, the applause was deafening. At that moment, I thought of Teddy and what he called America's March for Progress, the never-ending quest, as my husband described it, to make America, America, with liberty and justice for all. I can hear Teddy's voice booming, and when I say all, I mean all. Tonight's speaker has that same passion. A proud New Jerseyan, he went west to study at Stanford University, where he prepared himself for the contact sport of politics by playing on the varsity football team. In addition to undergraduate and master's degrees from Stanford, he earned a Rhodes Scholarship to the University of Oxford, where he received an honors degree in history. He then completed his education with a law degree from Yale. Now, with those stellar academic credentials, most would go on to big law, but not our speaker. He went back home to New Jersey to start a nonprofit organization in Newark that provided legal services for low-income families. He helped tenants take on slumlords, improve living conditions, and stay in their homes. He didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. When he was only 29, our honored guest was elected to the Newark City Council. He made it clear from the get-go that he was a man on a mission. He was an outspoken advocate for education reform. To call attention to the city's drug and violence problems, our speaker went on a 10-day hunger strike and lived in a tent near the drug dealing areas. And despite being routinely outvoted 8-1, he continued to propose initiatives for transparency in City Hall. While not successful on his first run for mayor, he was, as I said, a man on a mission. So he ran again and became a groundbreaking mayor of Newark, finally able to implement many of the reforms he had been advocating as a city councilor. During his 7-year tenure, this mayor of Newark led his city to its longest period of economic growth since the 1960s. He led the way by cutting his own salary by 8%. The crime rate dropped and the quality of life for residents improved, with more affordable housing, new green spaces and parks, increased educational opportunities, and more efficient city services. In 2013, this trailblazer ran for the United States Senate in a special election to fill the unexpired term of Frank Lautenberg. In 2014, he was reelected to a full 6-year term, and he's brought to the United States Senate the same spirit of innovation that animated his service as mayor, and he has embraced a bipartisan approach to tackling some of the most difficult problems facing New Jersey and the country. The poet Langston Hughes wrote, "There is a dream in the land, this dream today embattled, with its back against the wall. To save the dream for one, it must be saved for all." Hughes could have been describing the philosophy that motivates the public service of our honored guest this evening. He also could have been describing the theme of the remarkable book our speaker has written, United, Thoughts on Finding Common Ground and Advancing the Common Good. And it is a remarkable book indeed. As one reviewer described it, United is a powerful call for us to see ourselves in one another, to show kindness to each other every day, and to come together to work towards common goals. That call to come together has been the story of our speaker's life, a life of service, a life of purpose, a life with many chapters still to be written. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't wait to hear from him, and I know you can't either. So please welcome him now, the junior senator from the great state of New Jersey, Cory Booker.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm also pleased to welcome our moderator for this evening's event, award-winning journalist and host of NPR's On Point program, Tom Ashbrook. For 2 hours, For 2 hours every day, Tom guides his listeners in lively conversation on everything from breaking news to ancient poetry, featuring writers, politicians, journalists, artists, scientists, and ordinary citizens from around the world. Tom, we are so honored to have you here. Thank you so much. Let the discussion begin.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you very much. Senator Booker, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. I am kind of freaked out by this room.
Isn't it trippy?
It is.
You are not in Washington. Can you
Yeah,
believe
I
it?
really do. I'm having flashbacks right now to the Senate floor. This is amazing, really amazing. And I feel like I should be sitting over there, not here.
You were just in Mitch McConnell's desk.
I felt the spirit of Mitch McConnell.
Do you hang out there smoking stogies sometimes when he's not looking?
No, I do not. But I do go over to that desk a lot, or that area a lot. I spend a lot of time on this side of the aisle.
It's been a long time since I was in the actual Senate chamber. I forgot how intimate it is.
Yes.
You've got to get along with these people, but do you?
You know, I had some great advice from my mentor, Bill Bradley, the senator from New Jersey, who really gave me some very solid advice. But one of them was go down there and get to know your colleagues as people, as humans, not as their party or their geography. And so I went out of my way to try to have meals ask senators on the Republican side particularly, to go to meals with me, to be able to come to their office and sit with them, and had some incredible experiences.
Is it actually working? Because on the outside, we have the sense that people talk that game, but it no longer actually works.
So the overwhelming majority of my bills have been with Republican co-sponsors. I've passed legislation with Ted Cruz. I'm working on some great work with Marco Rubio on broadband access.
So you're tight with Ted Cruz.
Perhaps the most interesting dinner I had in Washington was with Ted Cruz, where literally people were walking past us at our table and they'd stop and do a double take, and then
Was he eating Democrats' hearts?
Well, I mean, just agreeing on a restaurant because I am a vegan and he is definitely a meat eater, But I learned the definition of a stealthy, not a selfie, but people walking by and casually taking pictures, and just like trying not to say, yeah. And before I finish the dinner, I'm suddenly seeing it on social media. So, but it was a great dinner, and we have to understand that we have so much that divides us, but our differences matter. If you really get to the core of it, our country matters so much more than our differences. And to think that we can't find some points of commonality to work on, I think is a disservice to ourselves and to the other people. I had to work with Chris Christie when I was a mayor, and Chris Christie and I could write a dissertation on our disagreements, but we worked very hard to belie what the media said, that they were predicting a clash 4 years later after he got elected between he and I. And we ended up doing some massive breakthroughs in the city of Newark because of our partnerships on the things we agreed on.
I promise I want to talk about the book. I want to talk about the values that you write about in the book. I want to talk about your work in the Senate, and of course this race for the presidency. But a couple of names that have just come up already, Mitch McConnell and Chris Christie. They're both very interesting right now. If what you say is true, that the good of the country is more important than the partisan divide, why have your colleagues, Republican colleagues in the Senate, said they will not consider a nominee for the Supreme Court to replace Antonin Scalia offered by President Obama? Any nominee.
Well, so clearly I disagree with that. I mean, you know, it's kind of ironic to me that you have an originalist that died, and I went back and reread the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2. It says that a president doesn't have a choice. It doesn't say he may. It doesn't say only in his first 3 years, not in his fourth years. It says the president shall. And then for us, it says that we shall, not if we decide to, or if
Us being the Senate, not we please.
Well, we are in the Senate right now.
This evening, all of us.
It's
senators.
difficult to look over here at Harry Reid right here.
Looking pretty good.
Look at Harry Reid has never been so attractive to me. But there's really no choice in the matter, and so that's why. For me, this is not only ironic, but unfortunate that it seems like it's heading towards a showdown. But I think the more important part of your question, which all of us sort of ask ourselves, and this is why one of the reasons I wrote the book is because everywhere I went, for the first time sort of leaving Newark and doing what you do in campaigns, which is really slowing down and getting to know people all over your state, from the wealthiest neighborhoods in New Jersey to the poorest, rural, urban, suburban. Every house party I went to, every event, when people could ask me questions, somebody or many people would ask me this lament about Washington being broken, or the divisiveness, not just in our hallowed civic spaces like this one, but even on the media and the like. And a lot of my points to folks is it's so easy to look at what's going on and get caught up in what I call a state of sedentary agitation, where you're so upset about what's going on, but you're failing to realize that you have a tremendous amount of power to change the culture and the climate in our country. And what frustrates me is that, you know, Alice Walker said the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place. And so we cannot allow ourselves to see things on TV and then surrender to cynicism, which I believe is a toxic spiritual state. Thank God that the abolitionists, thank God that the suffragettes, thank God that the labor organizers never gave up to cynicism.
Amen.
And to me, I think cynicism is a refuge for cowards. It's basically saying, oh, I can't do anything about these problems, so I'm just going to complain about them, or worse, become indifferent to the problems and the injustices of the world. And so I'm just a big believer that as much as we want to complain about things, we can't complain unless we assume responsibility and stop pointing blame at the Republicans or the Democrats and accept some responsibility for yourself. Now, the challenge is that it's a daunting task. The challenges of our country are a daunting thing. But we can never allow ourselves to let our inability to do everything to undermine our determination to do something about the problems.
We are going to talk for about 30 minutes and then invite your questions. And I just want to tell you all that now.
Right, but in the Senate,
will come around.
I mean, the gallery, they can't talk. They're not
Yeah,
allowed.
but here they can.
Okay.
Baby. So power to the people here
Yes.
tonight.
All right.
I have a lot
But
of
the
questions.
press behind us, those people, that's where the press sits. They're very scary to me. Those people intimidate me back there.
Yeah?
Yes.
Well, here I am.
Okay.
How scary am I? I don't know. Okay, so cynicism is a bad thing. Mitch McConnell says, no, we are not going to consider a nominee. I don't know who the president is going to reach out to say, hey, I want you to march out there as my nominee, even though you're just going to have to stand at a closed door and, you know, feel the cold freeze of Senate Republicans. So, Senator Booker, I have a question for you.
The dynamic is worse than that. Just so you know, whoever he puts up, it's not like putting up somebody in a political campaign where you can raise lots of money to defend yourself.
No.
Whoever he puts up, that person is going to be viciously attacked, and the decorum or the tradition is the nominee's not defending themselves. They're just taking hits as people are going and rifing through their lives, trying to find reasons why Obama's pick is bad.
So, your phone rings. It's the President of the United States. He needs somebody fairly young.
Hold on, you have to understand how it actually works.
No.
First, you get the dumbest question
You're going
in
to
the
tell me
world.
this is a hypothetical anyway.
Okay, but I just want you to know that when you get that call, it's the dumbest question in the world. They say no such thing as a dumb question.
It's all done. So
but
it's his third secretary.
No,
for
you're missing my
Cory Booker.
point. They call up and they say this. This is what first happens is, the dumb question is this. Hi, it's the White House. Would you please hold for the president? Yeah. Nobody says no at that point. You know?
Nah.
So I'm sorry, I'm busy.
So that call comes, he says, Senator Cory, I need a good soldier. I need somebody who's young, who's seen as reaching across the aisle, who's got a good legal education, maybe at Yale. somebody who's willing to sort of take the slam door in their face and who fellow senators will feel really bad leaving out in the cold. May I put you up as the nominee for the Supreme Court, Senator Booker?
I will definitely not give you an answer to that hypothetical, except for to say is I do not have any interest in the job. I really don't. I'm very happy being a United States Senator. I think I can get a lot more done on the issues I feel very passionate about right now, things like criminal justice reform, obvious things like investing in infrastructure, so I don't want to leave my job. So I'm not going to tell you what I would say if the President of the United States called me up, but I will tell you unequivocally, I'm very happy with my seat way in the back corner right there, and I'd like to stay there for a while.
Supreme Court chamber is even more intimate, you know.
It is, it definitely, and you don't have to worry about buying suits because you're under a robe.
Exactly.
You can just
You can wear anything
you
or
can just
nothing.
let it be free, and then just like,
Free.
freedom.
Free. Okay. There are people and ideas that I want to ask you about from your book, Unity, which is a very interesting story.
Yes.
And if I may, I'd like to ask you about how you think about these two people who you talk about very early in the book. One in the book is called Slave Mother, and the other is Dr. Stephen Henry Brown. Would you introduce us to them and tell us how you think about each of them?
So one of the things, I started a chapter in probably an unlikely way, which is for a guy who's sort of vaunted in Boston and Harvard. The line in the book I started off by saying, in this chapter I said, I hate Henry Louis Gates. And Skip is a dear friend of mine, and I actually love the guy. But he sort of sets me up in this chapter because he calls me up and says, hey, I've got this show called Finding Your Roots, where we trace people's roots. And I'm excited. I think he's inviting me to a premiere. And he says, no, I want to bring you on the show. And I suddenly get excited, and he starts feeding my ego like he does. And
of course.
I'm just eating it all up. He's like, oh, you're an up-and-comer. This is going to be great. But then he decides to pair me with, and this is where my ego suddenly shrinks instantly. He says, I want to pair you with John Lewis. And that's like pairing basically Superman with Jimmy Olsen, for crying out loud. And
Quick, go down and get beaten at Evan Pettis Bridge.
Yes, yes. I mean, the guy who's literally, just last week, I was a co-sponsor with Senator Sessions to give the Congressional Gold Medal to the people who marched, the foot soldiers, for the Voting Rights Act. So it just turned out this incredible odyssey where I was blown away because he even said that. For many African Americans, it's very hard to trace our history back because they didn't keep records past the 1870 census. It was the first time that they actually recorded blacks in any kind of systematic way. But he was able to pierce the veil in dramatic ways.
With DNA testing and very sophisticated genealogy.
Yes, legal documents. He found ancestors of mine that were slaves. Just stunning. So the two people you ask about, one is that my grandfather was much lighter skinned than his siblings and his parents, and it was obvious to many that he was not born to, his name was Lemery Jordan, not born to his father Jordan, and he lived with a lifelong stigma of being what they used, the term they used often towards him, he said, was the word bastard.
Stigma within his community.
And it's very big stigma within his community, almost a shame that he wore. I still remember exactly where I was when I was pressing him on this subject. I was a college student sitting in his living room, and he almost tears up as he's having to admit to me that he did not know who his father was. Well, Skip went back and decided to try to find out who his real father was. And using very educated guess, he narrowed it down and then went back to this one family, and he found that, Skip was interesting to me, he found that it's better to skip a generation and go to sort of my generation because most people don't want to know if their father had infidelities or anything like that. And so generously this man agreed to have his cheek swabbed.
This was the white descendant of...
Well, we don't know yet, but yes, the white descendant of Dr. Brown. And amazingly, it was a hit. My mom basically now had discovered her first cousin. They both shared a grandfather. And I just can imagine the moment where they sort of informed you, and most of us, this is what I found out stunning to me, was that our family trees in America are far more intertwined than we care to admit. And here's a family I could have walked right past, a white family, but we wouldn't know that there was a branch of our tree. And so he basically informed
and would they have thought, there's my cousin?
Yeah, an African American. And so they basically say to them, you know, you have a black branch of your tree, and one of your cousins happens to be the mayor of Newark, New Jersey. And so they flew the family up for an amazing reunion where there was just tears and hugs. And for me, it just started expanding my sense of family. beyond sort of what I had thought. Amazingly, I found out that I was a direct descendant of many slaves, but I was also the direct descendant of slave owners. I was a direct descendant of Native Americans, but I was also the direct descendant of people who fought in the Alabama militia during the Creek Wars to get rid of Native Americans from land. I was, and then we traced our history all the way back. I couldn't believe it. And he literally did this dramatic thing where he rolled open this, where he got my grandfather's grandfather, all the way back to 1640.
Oh, Jamestown
Yeah,
territory.
Jamestown territory, where my family was original settlers of the United States of America. And so
And those would be white settlers.
white settlers. I mean, I'm a direct descendant of a guy who was captured, a Confederate soldier that was captured in retreat. And so seeing this unbelievable tapestry, which he even said, it's a rare thing you can get American, that much of their trees solved, just gave me a strong message of our interconnectedness, but it also made me ache a little bit that some of the slaves you can only identify with terms like slave mother.
This is Skip Gates' term for a prominent member of your family
so
tree.
he knew the slave mother had relations with, and we don't know if it was rape, if it was love, we don't know anything, but the slave mother and one of my other direct descendants had a woman that was still talked about in my family. Everybody knew Etta Stamper, but it just hurt me that I didn't know her name, that her name, her history was really erased from my
Generic term.
a generic
for her.
term was slave mother. But powerful to me, and this is where I look at all of us in a room like this, where again we underestimate our power. What I discovered in this chapter, which as much as biology, we think biology matters, the truth, the chapter is called Conspiracy of Love. The more I thought about it was that deeper than those biological bonds are the spiritual bonds between Americans, because it talks about my father and his mama couldn't take care of him. It was strangers. It showed acts of kindness, decency, and love that changed his destiny. But the most chilling thing for me was that Skip, and again, there's no such thing as coincidences, I ended up being partnered with Henry Louis Gates, and I didn't get it, I ended up partnering with John Lewis, and I didn't get it until I was researching this book. Now, Politics Now, every story I wrote, I wanted to have 2 and 3 and 4 sources to confirm it, and there was a story, I didn't want to have a Ben Carson moment. I do love Ben Carson, and I've been praying for him a lot recently.
You're cool then.
It's very cool, extraordinary man of accomplishment. And so one family story was moving into Harrington Park, New Jersey, 1969. Back then in northern New Jersey, in Bergen County, one of our most prominent counties, there was only 3 towns in a 70-town county that they let blacks live. And the way they kept blacks out was through real estate steering. If a black family shows up at a house, they'd say the house is sold.
This is an amazing story. Listen closely to this. I was blown away reading this story. And the role of Marty Friedman. Somebody I want to ask you about it.
And so this is what blew me away.
Tell the story of Marty Friedman, your dad, the realtor's office, the dog.
Right. So I knew this is the family story, and basically the family story as I knew it was that my parents go to Harrington Park, New Jersey.
We should set the stage, if you'll forgive me, because not everyone may know. Senator Booker's mother and father were among the very earliest African-American executives of IBM.
Yes.
They worked their way up to quite prominent positions within this very successful company.
Yes.
So they were, economically, this is where they would look for a home.
Right.
And racially, is another story.
And I'll just emphasize that the conspiracy love, and this is stuff we're glossing over now, but my parents would admit that all of their success was because of self-reliance, hard work, and all that, but also because of massive interventions, kindness, decency, and love from strangers along the way. And they got their first jobs in Washington, D.C. because of an organization called the Urban League. I don't care what your background is in this room, most of you, whether you're Irish, whether you're a woman, whether you're gay, some point corporate America didn't want you. And this was a period they were denying blacks, and it was this organization, people going out of their way, volunteer Americans helping my parents. So next thing you know, my parents are executives. My father is breaking all kind of records as a salesman. They're trying to move into northern New Jersey because my mom's working at an IBM facility in northern New Jersey. My dad's in Manhattan. And they encounter real estate steering, and they go to the Fair Housing Council. They assign them a test couple. They set up an elaborate sting operation.
Because every house they went to, they would say, oh, sorry, it's spoken for, it's sold.
Spoken for, sold. I mean, crazy things when they would go to neighborhoods.
But they sent a white couple to the very same house. They made the very same offer as your parents on a Friday, I guess.
Yeah. Yep.
And on Monday, Oh my God.
Yeah, so the white couple pretended they loved the house, they put a bid on the house, it was accepted, contracts drawn out, and on the Monday of the closing, instead of the white couple showing up, my father showed up and a lawyer showed up, and the lawyer walks in, confronts the real estate agent, who is angry immediately, gets up and punches my dad's lawyer in the face, and then sigs a dog on my
There's
father.
a Doberman in the corner.
Yes, and so, but I had to fact check this story because the older my father got, the bigger the dog would get. And so, you know, I'm about to put this story out before the public, and I want to make sure. So I go back and just do the research. I find the head of the Fair Housing Council from the 1960s, who is still the head of the Fair Housing Council today, 90-year-old woman. But then I find the lawyers, this group of lawyers, and I go to them and I say, why would you represent me? And the man says to me, he goes, look, I remember the day me and my partner made the decision to start getting involved with the Fair Housing Council. We were struggling young lawyers, just doing house closings, barely making it. And I'm sort of like, well, why did you do this? He goes, well, it was a Monday. I go, how did you even remember it was a Monday? And they said, it was a Monday because we came to work and we were so moved by what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge Bloody Sunday the day before. And so suddenly I'm learning that this chain of events, men and women on that bridge probably had no idea that their stance on that bridge would trigger a chain of events through time and space that immediately in New Jersey, young lawyers who were never involved in the civil rights movement suddenly would change their mind, be inspired to get involved, to help dozens and dozens of black families. And I even said to him, did you realize that one of the families you were helping get an incredible education, because it's one of the best school systems in the state? You changed my destiny. Did you realize then that maybe I would become a United States Senator? And he said, no, because I saw those young people on that bridge, and I knew basically that I had to do the best that I could with what I had where I was. And so those spiritual chords, deeper than biology, where we underestimate the power of, I often say the biggest thing we can do in any day is often a small act of kindness, decency, and love. And it unlocks a chains of events beyond our imagination, but it changes this country. And that's really one of the points of that chapter.
In 2012, you were out stumping for Barack Obama's reelection. And you took heat for one interview that you did, I think it was on Meet the Press.
Yes.
Where Mitt Romney's private equity background here in Boston, Bain Capital, was under attack. And forgive me if you'll correct, but you said you were nauseated by these attacks on his private equity background. And I remembered that. There was some, kerfuffle about that at the time, because Democrats were attacking those pretty heartily. And then I read that early in your political career in Newark, one of the people who stepped forward and became a kind of a mentor to you was a Newark private equity guy named Ray Chambers. So you knew from early on in your political life a guy of extraordinary wealth, your words. He'd done buyouts with Avis and Gibson, calling cards and all that, greeting cards. Was that what you were thinking about, Ray Chambers, when you took exception to people criticizing Mitt Romney's background in private equity? And how does that relate to the campaign right now, where Bernie Sanders is ready?
Well, it's more than that, and it's much more than that. So first and foremost, rating agencies that were rating trash as treasure, mortgage industries that were doing things that I think are criminal, banks that were over-leveraged, all of this stuff was horrible and should be condemned. And led to an economic collapse that led to a recession. And by the way, when the country's going through a recession, it's cities that go through depressions.
You had layoffs.
Right. Not just layoffs in my city, but unemployment rising well into the double digits. So those things I condemn, and we, as a society, need to curb the awful things that were going on, and some of which I believe are still going on. But what I have a problem with is when we get gratuitous in our criticisms, that we paint a broad brush that begins to pit American against American, because I have friends of mine that are in that industry that say, we need to get rid of carried interest or just whatever, sort of condemn an industry as a whole. But the more important nuance to that is, and I love the fact that Mayor Nutter is sitting here, who's a pretty extraordinary public servant and a guy that is like a brother of mine. We were both mayors at the same time. He's really one of the greater public servants in America that I've met, and I've met a lot of great public servants. And he and I know you need everybody when you're a mayor. You don't want to demonize whole-scale industries. And so at this point, when I'm on that show, I'm working on a $130 million project that are going to get kids of mine into apprenticeship programs with unions, where I got the unions at the table, developers, I've got activists, all around the table to create a project that is really insightful, creating low-income housing in our downtown, right next to affordable housing, just really my vision. But you know what? A part of that was Goldman Sachs, who was doing early stage financing when I could barely beg anybody to put money into our inner city. Prudential Financial was buying our tax credits to get the financial markets, which are the envy of the world, that we have access to be able to help me create hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs over the long term was very critical to me. So what I reacted against is just anybody who, I don't like the sort of short-term demagoguery. I want people to talk in a sophisticated way. I don't want to pull out pitchforks and go, you know, the guys at Bain, two of them were the biggest bundlers for the Democratic Party, big supporters of
i.e. Contribution collectors.
Contribution collectors. They had to hire security. They were getting death threats because of the climate that was created. And so I just say that, like, be fearsome in your condemnation of what is actually wrong and ailing our society. But my greatest heroes are always people that, even in that ferocious criticism, still are always leading with love, still are always understanding that it's not always as simple as good and bad. And to correct for these things, we need to make sure that we're correcting for the exact ill that is causing us a problem.
So let's cut to it right here, because our time will go by, and I don't want to lose this. We'll come back to more detail from the book, but you are supporting Hillary Clinton in this presidential Democratic Party race already. She had an extraordinary win in South Carolina yesterday, just really an extraordinary win. But it has been a very hard-fought race, and you've seen the huge crowds also come out for Bernie Sanders, and I'm sure you're very alert to the passion of all those young supporters and more for Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders says the American banking system is a fraud. And his critique of Hillary Clinton is she's too much a part of the system to go in and do the systemic changes that we need to really get out of this problem that we're in. And he might say, well, it's nice that Goldman Sachs gave seed money and more for your project in Newark, but we got a big problem here, and we can't have politicians who are indebted or unwilling to go in and do bulldozer work here. Is he wrong? Is that the kind of simplification that you're objecting to?
Yeah, well, it's a simplification because I've actually read both people's plans, and me and other objective folks have looked at the plan that Secretary Clinton has, and says it is very strong and it's going to make the kind of reforms that are needed, because we need to go a lot further, I think, than we've gone so far to curbing the challenges on Wall Street. And I also believe that we need to create a tax system that's fair, because I think that there are a lot of, that if you look at our tax system objectively, it creates the most perverse incentives imaginable. It basically is, it's regressive in ways that are frustrating to me. And at a time that we need to be investing in higher education, we need to be investing in infrastructure, we need to do things that are bold and big, like universal pre-K for our citizenry, to have a tax system that gives breaks to people who, this idea of trickle-down economics, that we give breaks for the people that are in the 1%, that just hasn't proved true for the last 30 years.
But Bernie versus Hillary is way past that. He wants to bring it down. He wants to take it right down. He wants free college for everybody, break up the banks. He goes further than Secretary Clinton would go in the expansiveness of the political revolution that he's describing. Well, what's wrong with that?
Well, first of all, you know, understand this. My support for one of the two of the candidates is not really derived by the differences between their Wall Street plans. I go home to Newark, New Jersey, where I have lived now for the last 20 years. And I live with a sense of urgency that even if you brought down Wall Street, got rid of it, let the financial markets move to another country, even if you did all of that, just ended Wall Street itself, that's not going to change the urgencies that my folks in my community are facing, which have to do with a lot of crazy things, like people who work a full-time job and time on top of that and still live in poverty. The toxic levels from Superfund sites that are all over our country, but happen to particularly be in poor neighborhoods like my city, where there's 20% increase in birth defects, 20% increase in autism rates for kids born in those toxic sites. It's not going to change the fact that we have college debt for my residents that is outrageous. I can go through the things, especially when it comes to the horrors of one of the greatest sins this country has perpetrated since 1980, what I think is a cancer on the soul of our country, which is the criminal justice system, which has destroyed communities in our country. So I understand that to me, this is not a one-issue election, and we can talk about Wall Street all we want, but I support Hillary Clinton because, for me, this is very personal for me, but I'm going to jump on board with the candidate that I think can best address the ills of the unfinished business of America. And it's not just Wall Street reform. There's a lot more challenges going on that we have to work on.
We want to take questions from the audience. We are ready to do that. There are microphones that will be circulating. If you'd like to put a question to Senator Booker, put your hand up, make it loud and clear, and somebody will come to you. All the way in the back.
Hi, Senator Booker. My name's Nick. I'm from Cape Cod.
And I wish I could remember exactly what senator seat you're sitting in right there. But I think you might be sitting, no, White House's seat might be over there. Either way, Mr. Senator, what can I do for you?
So we talked about the differences between Sanders and Clinton, and notice for their supporters, if Hillary gets the nomination, a lot of Sanders supporters are saying, I'd rather vote for Trump, or I'm not going to vote at all. How do we get those people on board to Hillary's campaign?
So this is living out every day for me on my social media feeds, because I've never seen anything like it. When I post things about Hillary, it's like I get crushed from both sides. The most toxic, bile, hatred-filled tweets from people on the right. And then I'm just blown away by, I get these laments from people on the left, like, I used to think you were a great guy, but now I see that you're a tool of the Wall Street establishment machine.
All caps, tool.
Yeah, so I'm just sort of surprised that earnest fellow Democrats are criticizing someone who, when I look at the breadth of her career, from the time she was coming out of Yale Law School, and trust me, you graduate from Yale Law School, there are people throwing money at you for many jobs. She goes to work for the Children's Defense Fund. As a first lady, the issues she picked for is why she has deep resonance in often African-American communities, because even from then, I could take you through her whole career. Every time she was beaten, or every time she lost, she's constantly being vilified. She has this grit where she comes back to higher levels of service, whether it was the healthcare loss that she had because she was crazy enough to think we should have universal healthcare, to even losing to Barack Obama, who I was an early and strong supporter of. She keeps coming back to greater levels of service. So here's a person that is moving an agenda that is contrary to somebody who wants to support Trump, or worse, this is what frightens me, is that somebody that would let a loss where their candidate loses, have them throw up their hands, surrender to cynicism about our government, which I've talked about already, and then make a political statement, because I can tell you this, Mayor Nutter can tell you this, that it is a greater statement. The greatest political statement often is not your activism, it is your indifference. King said it so eloquently that what we will have to repent for in this day and age is not the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and indifference of the good people. So to check out, you are giving more strength to the very thing that you're condemning. So I don't know how that's going to be, regardless of what the output of this primary is, but my hope is that all of us, and in fact the Washington Post just wrote an article about my responses to many of these folks who are heaping insults on me from my left. My hope is that this is a time that we can heal, come together again as a party in this case, and get back to advocating for the real substantive things that are going to make a difference for people in our nation, especially those living at the margins.
I want to get a question right here, but if I may just piggyback on this, what do you say to the young woman in Georgia, Black Lives Matter movement supporter, who held up the sign in front of Hillary, throwing her language from the 90s back in her face about super predators and gang members that must be brought to heel, seeing these as signs of a racial attitude in the Clinton White House in the 90s that would not fly or pass muster today?
Well, so first of all, I say to the young lady who's doing that, keep doing things like that. Don't stop your activism. Keep disturbing the comfortable and comforting the disturbed. I'm a very big supporter of what I think the Black Lives Matter movement has added to the overall dialogue. Now, as far as Hillary Clinton's statements from the mid-1990s, first of all, I think you saw such a crushing majority of African American votes in South Carolina, because this is a couple that has had an intimate involvement in the black community for decades. There is a trust, there's a love there. And to blame Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton for their support of the 1994 crime bill the Congressional Black Caucus, most of them supported the crime bill. There's only one person in this race who actually voted for the crime bill, and it's not Hillary Clinton, it is Bernie Sanders. And so that it was a time that there was a lot of fear. And again, I was in law school at the time and was outraged by the crime bill, as I write in my book. But what I've seen from my own personal self is, again, Hillary Clinton came to me, we had our early conversations before the campaign got going, was literally asking me for advice about a lot of the legislation. Then from those conversations with her policy team, she blew me away by making the very first thing she talked about. Her opening statement in this campaign in policy was about criminal justice reform and the urgency for that. So I have a trust for her that she's going to make this an important issue and sees the urgency that I see every single day in the streets of the city I live.
Question here?
Hi, my name is Wendy, and I live in Leominster, but I'm from New York City, and I'm a product of the New York City public housing system. In my 40s, I've gone back to school. I'm about to graduate from Mount Holyoke as a Francis Perkins Scholar, and
Great.
and thank you. And I have 2 special needs children at home. I have a 10-year-old who's on the autism spectrum and an early onset bipolar 15-year-old. Inspired by them and the struggles, I'm running for school committee in Leominster. Wow. But I'm watching this presidential election for the first time ever. I'm embarrassed. And I have to tell my children, because my 10-year-old says, if I talked like that, you'd ground me for the rest of my life. And I have to watch what they hear on the evening news from people who want to be their president. So what would you say to somebody like me who in my 40s is coming into public office, but also younger people who see this and think, why would I want to get in that mud pit? What would you say, because you're there serving us and you see it from the inside?
Okay, so first of all, I really hope you read my book, because the book celebrates you. There are so many people in the book that tell stories like you do of incredible trials and challenges, but this grit and fortitude to live their values, to make their life their testimony of their truth. God bless your kids, because James Baldwin said it so powerfully that children are never good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. And your kids have a ridiculously amazing model. And if it was not inappropriate, if you were not sitting in the senator's chair, I would go over and hug you right now, because you give me strength and encouragement. So I can't say anything about what can you do in response to the vitriol, the nativism, the acerbic language, especially these last 2 weeks, that's coming out of the Republican side of the aisle. I can't say anything about that except for if you look. My father said this in a it may sound silly. Forgive me for doing this, but this is my dad when I was a little boy. He would, if I'm complaining about things in the world, he would tell me that there's 2 ways to go through life, as a thermometer or a thermostat. And he said a thermometer is just going to reflect the world. And if you encounter heat and bigotry and anger, you're just going to reflect that, go up and down. But he challenged me to be a thermostat, that if you encounter a room that's too hot, you can be the mechanism that helps to cool things down. If you counter situations that are too low, you can be that. And that's one of the points I'm trying to make in this book, is that we have a lot more power, as I said earlier, but more importantly, that we underestimate our ability to change the dialogue. Now, one example that I give all the time is just the fact that we are people right now who have these devices that are so much more powerful than the organizers in the civil rights movement do. And I've drawn inspiration from not people in the Senate or in the House or in the presidency, but from people who find ways to call to the consciousness of our country, even if it's in small ways. Like one example that I love that was a bunch of really creative people was the It Gets Better campaign. One of the highest rates of juvenile suicide happened with gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender teens. The abuse, the homelessness, the mental health challenges. And to find ways to make people not feel lonely and isolated, but to understand that we're all in this together. There are ways we can do that now with this powerful computer. And so I don't know what to say about Donald Trump, but I know what I do every morning. And I've been very agitated over the last few months. When I saw France get bombed, the direct attacks, and they come back the next day and say, we're going to take 30,000 immigrants, and then suddenly in my country we're talking about not only not letting in refugees, but there are people talking about not letting in Muslims, period. And that upsets me and hurts me. And so my only challenge is, so what did I do? Is I decided, you know what, I'm going to turn up the volume in everything I post, in the conversations I have, any opportunity I have to talk about the values that I believe in, to counter that, because you can't counter hate with hate. You can't counter darkness with darkness. You've got to be the light and be the love. And you obviously are living your love. So thank you.
Thank you. I want to take this question from a private. Let me just ask you before I do, in this vein, we see what you're saying. Your governor, who you spoke of very early in our conversation, Chris Christie, has just endorsed very publicly at a critical time Donald Trump. Interpret that for us, New Jerseyan, who knows him well.
So I haven't talked to the governor yet. I was just texting a mutual friend of ours, kind of like, what's going on here? Because I think that even New Jersey Republicans are now coming out very publicly condemning what he did. And so because he's a friend, I want to talk to him and find out his reasons. And again, that's the way we've had. I'm not going to jump all over him in public before I've had a conversation with somebody personally. I hate when that's done to me by my friends. But again, it's not about what they do. If they criticize you, if they condemn you, it's never about them, it's about you. And one of my greatest mentors in this book, this whole chapter about her, Virginia Jones, she taught me that hope is not an attitude of, oh, everything's nice, everything's wonderful, everything's great. It's not being Pollyannish, it's not being optimistic. Hope is a response. It is a response to despair. It is the active conviction that darkness and despair will not have the last word. And she brought me in one of my favorite chapters in the book, when I was just this overly confident, dare I say arrogant, young Yale Law graduate, or Yale Law student, and I went to her thinking that I'm gonna ride my horse into town.
She'd be so happy to see
you.
you.
She'd be so happy to see me, yes.
Yeah.
And she greets me at the door, and she couldn't care less who I was. I told her, I was like John Wayne. I was like, I think I might even called her Little Philly. And she just couldn't be bothered with me. And one of the things she did in our early interactions was take me to the bottom of Martin Luther King Boulevard, which was, as you'll see, a very dangerous street, lots of open-air drug dealing, an abandoned building that was being used as a crack den. And she said, describe what you see around you. And I started describing what I saw. I thought this was just a test of like visual perception. And she said, just looked disappointed and angry. And finally, she just says, you can't help me. And I was stunned, and this elderly woman turns around, starts marching away from me. And I ran after her and grabbed her, very respectfully, mind you. And I said, what are you talking about? And then she says to me, she goes, boy, you need to understand something. The world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you're one of those people who only sees problems, darkness, and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those stubborn people who every time you open your eyes, no matter what you see, no matter how wretched the reality, you see hope, you see possibility, you see love, you see the face of God, then you can be one of those people that helps me. And so I'm on the floor, this floor sometimes, and just hear things that make me feel like I am banging my head against an implacable brick wall. But how dare I give up or get discouraged when my very presence on this floor as the fourth elected African American in the history of this country, my very presence in the Senate, in the history of the country, only now 5 African Americans have been elected to this body. It's reminded to me every day that I am here because of Americans of all backgrounds, did not give up, despite what they saw, the hatred, the bigotry, the domestic terrorism like has never before been seen on our soil. And so I understand right now we're hearing nativism. I understand we're hearing bigotry. I understand we're hearing people appealing to the lesser angels of our nature. But we have the potential to let loose a chorus of love and courage and hope and promise. And it's not about them. And you talk about Chris Christie, I tell this to my city a lot. In 2008, there were lines around the polling place in Newark to go vote. And I tell you, I went up to the end of that line, and I know how you all treat your elected officials up here in this great state. But in Newark and New Jersey, we keep it real. So when I, nobody blows sunshine at you. So I come up to the end of the line, and it's not like, "Hi, Mayor Booker." And by the way, I have police officers next to me. They're like, "Hi." Nobody's like, "Hi, Mayor Booker. What a historic day." No, the woman at the end of the line looks at me and says, "Don't you think you're cutting in this line now? I don't care who you are. You ain't special. You're waiting like the rest of us." And what did I do? I look at this woman. I'm Cory Booker, and I look at her and I go, "Yes, ma'am." 1 year later, though, I go to vote in their gubernatorial election, and nobody is there. I walk in to see the poll worker, and she looks lonely, so I give her a hug. And then people come up to me after John Corzine loses, Chris Christie wins, and I look at the data. If big cities in New Jersey had just voted at 75% of the year before, nobody would know who Chris Christie's name is most likely. And people come up to me and say, hey, they're cutting money to Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood is closing their doors. They're cutting the earned income tax credit, which is a raise of taxes on the poorest of New Jerseyans. Hey, they're pulling out of regional greenhouse gas agreements. Number one reason why kids miss school in America and New Jersey is asthma. Why are they doing this to us? Why are they doing this to us? And my response is, they didn't do anything to us. We did it to ourselves. And so you can curse the darkness all you want, but unless you're willing to light a candle and overcome that darkness with your own actions and convictions, then nothing's going to change in this world.
The senator is going to be signing books just out here in the hall as soon as we wrap up, which will be in just a couple of minutes. One last question.
So thank you for speaking well of those that you don't agree with. That is a lost art in politics, and it is something that goes a long way. I would ask, what are you hopeful about in the next 24 to 12 months? The world in Washington is going to look very different than it does now. And what are you excited about finishing out this year and then looking towards next?
So I kind of want to turn your question on its head, because I'm a prisoner of hope, and I could rattle off a lot of things about Washington and the like. But I want to turn your question on the head because I promise you in the rest of this year, there'll be moments where I'm in my home, curled up in a ball on my bed, and feeling brokenhearted. There'll be times where I go home and I confess what some of my vices are. I go home sometimes and just feel this uncontrollable need to engage in a sensual embrace with two men named Ben and Jerry. So I just want to end, if this is the last response, I just want to end to tell you that in this book I call for us to remember who we are. We're a nation founded in perfect ideals in an imperfect reality. Read our founding documents. They reflect that imperfect reality. Women aren't mentioned at all. Native Americans are savages. Stokely Carmichael used to always say, constitute. I can only say 3/5 of that word because blacks were referred to as 3/5 of a human being. But yet, in those founding documents, we're the oldest constitutional democracy, ideas were put forward that motivated so many generations of Americans to work towards these goals. The founders in the Declaration of Independence, and I know I love these things like self-reliance and rugged individualism, important things, but rugged individualism didn't get us to the moon. It didn't map the human genome, it didn't build the roads and bridges, and it didn't found this country. At the end of the Declaration of Independence, they say we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. It was a declaration of interdependence, that we need each other, like the old African saying, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, as a family, as a town, as a state, as a country, you got to go together. And so I say this to you to say that I call for a real love, and that love is patriotism, and patriotism in our political context is often an excuse just to try to put somebody down. I'm more patriotic than you are. But when I hear from a young lady like that, to me, that she doesn't have a flag pin on. I didn't see her pledge allegiance to the flag today, but that's what patriotism is love of country, which necessitates loving other countrymen and women. And the point I want to make to you is that I'm sorry to inform those of you who don't know, and there's probably a few of you that don't know this fact, if you are going to live life with a courageous love, and I'm not talking about speeches and things like that, I'm just talking about extending yourself beyond your comfort zone, reaching out to other people, believing in your heart the values and the ideals of this country, and trying to manifest them through your deeds. If you are a lover of America, if you are an American lover, I promise you this, and this is to your answer, where I'm going to be at some point in the remainder of this year. I promise you this. You will get your heart broken. You will get your hopes stomped on. You will have those moments where courage is manifested just by breathing. The pressure on your chest is so much that it's just getting somehow the will to get out of bed and go outside for another day of loving. Now, in the book, I have painful stories about this need to, when you're broken and burned, to try to resurrect love. And the story I'll end with is just one of those moments for me where I was done. I had been on scene for another kid's murder in America, and we lose children every single day to gunfire, and to see it up close and personal. We try to build these walls where we don't see the deaths in our inner cities, but to be on those streets and to be with a kid trying to stop blood pouring from his chest, seeing foamy blood pouring from his mouth, sticking your fingers in his throat, trying to clear a passage. After that, I was not a mayor. I was just I had lost a mayoral election. I was already defeated. And now I'm sitting in the projects in Newark, living on the 16th floor, trying to scrub this kid's blood off my hands. All I could do was weep in that sink with an anger and a rage that I had never felt before, ready to quit. How could this country, which we swear, we pledge allegiance that we'll be a nation of liberty and justice for all, but yet we aren't doing what we should be doing to stop children from dying at rates we haven't seen in wars. And so I confess to you that I was giving up. This was a moment with me where I wasn't going to run for office. I was ready to give up. And I come down into the lobby of the projects where I was in, and I walk through the lobby, and it's a humble mom who I'm walking through the lobby, and I remember that she lost her child in 1980, was murdered. A guy who served in the military was murdered, and who am I to give up? She's still the Lieutenant President of these buildings. And that's when I get out and I see that woman, Miss Virginia Jones. It's a courtyard. Picture it, it's early morning, the courtyard of these projects. Her back is turned to me. I'm feeling like I'm 100 feet underwater. I'm drowning. And suddenly I look up and I see her, and she's like a light of the stars. And I feel like I wish she would send me a line and pull me out of this depth of despair that I couldn't come out for. And then I see her, and she, almost as if she could read my mind, she turns around. This 5 feet, 70-something-year-old woman sees me across the courtyard, and she throws her arms open, and it was exactly what like a little boy, I scurried to her. And I'm so much bigger than her, but when she wrapped me in her arms, I felt like it was the safest place on the planet Earth. And she said two things to me, which is the point I want to make to you. And she said two words over and over again, and they are words that I've held on to through so much heartbreak, through so much pain, through mistakes where I was at fault and I felt shame. I held on to these words. And the words are not about religion, they're about us. Brothers and sisters of the Spirit, they're about us. It's about our history and our ancestry. It's about our country. And what she said to me as she rubbed my back as I wept like a little boy in her arms, she said it over and over again. She said, "Stay faithful, stay faithful, stay faithful." And so I'm telling you right now, we have work to do in this country. And if you care, if you live passionately, if you believe in the ideals of this nation and see what's still going on in this country, it's going to be difficult. Sometimes you'll feel overwhelmed. But it's people like her that said, let me know, don't let your inability to do everything undermine your determination to do something. Stay faithful in the course and know it's those little actions, the defiant ones that say, in the midst of all of this blackness, I will light that candle. And I might not think it makes a difference, but it might just trigger a chain of events that generations yet unborn will feel the light and warmth that I let in this world. If we stay faithful, despair be damned. As great as our yesterdays as a country, with our faith in this nation, I promise you that our tomorrows will be even more glorious and better.
Senator Booker, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There was a, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll just close with one comment, and the senator will be in the lobby if you'd like to see him there. Reading yesterday, there was a tough piece in the Daily Beast, but they talk about a little girl looking up at you like you're a holy cross between LeBron James and Zeus. And we hear your passion. You also know expectations are very high. We wish you faith and we wish you good luck. Thank you very much for being with us here today.
Thank you.